day. Yep, excellent, excellent. So this is, so just to make sure you're in the right place, this is, we're going to basically talk about innovation at global studios. We have some great people to kind of share their perspective with us. So we'll start with a quick round of introductions. And then we're going to have some visuals to hopefully give you a little bit of visual treat as well. So as we do the introductions, we'll show a little bit of a demo video as we do the introductions. And I'm going to do that in a slightly different order. I'm trying to, again, build a story here around the people we have on the panel. So we'll actually start with Galyn. So Galyn is a senior producer at Pixar, which is a brand I don't think that needs any introduction. She's worked, her credit list is amazing, starting from Toy Story to Ratatouille and everything in between. She was also my mentor at Pixar, so I'm just really excited to have her perspective on this panel. So I think, Galyn, you want to say anything, or should we just roll the... Okay, so we can do the Pixar reel first. So just beautiful work, and since this is a very startup entrepreneurial community, obviously what an amazing exit for that company, right? So, okay, so moving on, Al is a general partner with Technicolor Ventures, and so again, a very interesting perspective to have on this panel. And Al has a wonderful reel for us to look at for, from MPC, which is a company that is part of the Technicolor family. And so just switching gears here, we saw some beautiful animation work, and from MPC, what we'll see is a lot more of the visual effects type of work that we see in live action films. So I guess, Al, do you want to say something before we
No, other than just the MPC is a Technicolor company, and MPC works with pretty much every studio, every major studio, big tentpole films, but again, very different, like you said, and more on the visual effects side.
Super cool. Truly the stuff that dreams and nightmares are made of, right? So, both those reels, the Pixar one and the MPC one, the visuals that you see up on the screen, I mean, they're polished, they look completely believable, but there is an incredible amount of innovation that goes behind actually making those visuals happen. And so I thought I'd take a slightly different twist. So what I brought from Rhythm and Hues is actually a reel that we submitted this year to the Academy for the SciTech Award. So every year the Academy actually recognizes different companies or different technologies for technical achievement. And so I thought I'd bring that reel to show, just because it'll start to connect between these wonderful polished images, but the kind of technical innovation that's happening behind the scenes to get there as well. And just a quick introduction for myself. My name is Apurva, and I'm the Chief Visual Officer at Prana and Rhythm and Hues Studios. So we can roll the... I should say something.
Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing
So a little interesting backstory about that. The tiger in Life of Pi is entirely computer generated. And so some of the early tests that we did were like when the tiger starts, so as the movie progresses, he loses weight. And so the way his skin needs to hang, more loosely around his skeleton and all of that. So those were the kind of tests that we were doing so early on. So that's the level of detail we do have to get into in these things to make them believable and have the audience sort of suspend their disbelief. So, and then we have Oren. So this is a very different part of the spectrum. So Oren has a company called Magisto, and they actually do some amazing work with user-generated content. And so hopefully you can tell us a little bit what we're going to see.
Sure. So Magisto is a very different beast of obviously of the big production studios that we all know and love. we're actually taking some of the magic that has been grown in the last more than 100 years in Hollywood and other places, and we try to take this magic dust and put it on people's memories. And in order to do that, we had to rethink how people are expected to do video editing. So video editing, which is visual storytelling, is so sophisticated, and again, in terms of what's been the progress in the last 100 years of this very mature industry right now, that sometimes we expect people to edit their own video, like things like iMovie. It's almost ridiculous. Okay, it's like, hey, here's the scissors, go become some Coco Chanel or some artist, right? It's almost as ridiculous as that. There's no way you can make that artistic or interesting. People don't understand even the basic things about photography, which is framing or the importance of cut. So trying to tell that everything to the average user is just not feasible. So in order to circumvent that, we had to kind of invent a new technology, which is AI-based, artificial intelligence, that actually teaching the computer to become a professional as much as it can be, video editor and producer. It has some resemblance to the stuff that's being done on studios. Again, we try to get to that level of magic, but also with a very, very different kind of content, extremely limited, with people that don't know how to shoot. And we try to take that raw content we all have on our camera rolls and galleries and hard disk in too large numbers, and to try to turn that into something which has some of the emotional magic we all feel when we go to the cinema. So what you'll see here right now is part of that. Magisto right now has 45 million users worldwide, generated more than, lots of hundreds of millions of views so far. And this is not by one big hit, right? It's lots and lots and lots of videos that generates, 20, 100 views. And when they sum up, it's a huge long tail of people's life experiences. And just to give you a context, there's billions of devices right now, smartphones, capturing photos and videos around the world. So there are billions life experiences right now, today, being captured. And the percentage of them that's being produced and shared is almost zero. So, what we know today is the internet, which is YouTube and Facebook and everything, is not even a tiny part of what people actually capture. That's just the size of this market. And we perceive ourselves a bit like the early, as much as Magisto's technology is extremely advanced, it's still really just the beginning of this parallel industry. And we think about ourselves as kind of almost the first people that, that use the scissors, connected the two pieces of film and say, hey, this is actually produced in motion. That is the maturity of this industry, but it is already pretty big. So let's just look at that and remember that everything that we see there is generated by computer from the beginning to the end. This is actually a project we've done with users worldwide. We call it I Love My City. And we just asked people to show how much they love the city. And it automatically creates stories about how it is to live in different places worldwide.
Cool. So, I thought that we would start off maybe by asking Galyn and Al, because they've worked with a lot of sort of large tentpole projects and brands that we've all heard of. Just what that production process, that planning process, what that looks like, and maybe if Galyn, you can kick that off.
Sure. I can speak more specifically to Pixar and then see if we can sort of generalize it a little bit. But basically at Pixar, we consider ourselves a director-driven studio. And so how it works is a director will come up with what we call the 3 pitches, the 3 ideas. And that really is just 3 very different ideas of stories that they might want to tell. And whichever one is chosen, the pitch can really be as simple as just a couple of lines or maybe a paragraph and some visuals about the kind of world you want to build and the kind of story you want to tell and who your protagonist might be. And from there, you start working towards a treatment, which is basically usually about a 10 or 20 page document that outlines what the story is going to be, the characters, maybe little snippets of dialogue, give you a sense of what this thing is really going to be about, write a script, and then from the script phase, we enter pre-production, and pre-production for us is basically everything that is the building of the world, but not the actual telling of the story. So creating characters, creating sets, creating environments, and that's going on at the same time that you storyboard the film, where you're basically telling the whole story out through story panels. At Pixar, we tend to do a lot of that. I think storyboarding is more an anomaly of the animation industry at this point. I think live action, they do a different process called workbooking. It's not quite as detailed as storyboarding, where a storyboarded film will run the full length of the film, and we will storyboard a film anywhere between 4 and 8 times in its entirety before we even begin production. And then production is the process where we're doing our layout, our animation, our lighting, and eventually our film out. So the thing that's sort of interesting is that each film is almost like its own little startup company and project, because you really are just starting with a handful of people, a director, a producer, a couple of story people, maybe an editor, and you're working on a seed, a germ of an idea, and writers, and trying to develop something that's worth making and worth investing. And then when you've got something that you can say, oh wow, that's pretty interesting, you go for green light and you try to get the funding to actually make the entire film, and then you release it, and with that release comes the marketing and the investment and in terms of trying to make it successful. And I think the difference for a Pixar producer versus an independent producer is that I don't have to look for my funding. My funding comes to me from Disney. So the hardest part, in my mind, I don't even have to worry about. I just have to build the team and get the thing made, get in my, figure out what's in that director's head and sort of get the most of that vision onto the screen for the amount of money that I've been given. Independent filmmakers, they have to go and find that money themselves, and that's really challenging.
Yeah, for Technicolor, which is a partner of the content creators, we sort of take it and we start working with the studios, typically in the live action side, post the storyboarding when they're actually starting production. And with NPC, where we have God knows how many thousands of employees, we work on with the studios. They are asking for bids, and we have to go through their script, and we have to say, look, we think this scene's going to take this number of man days, and then there's a rate card tied to the man days, and it's very competitive with people like Rhythm and Hughes, and then the studio decides who to work with, and actually sometimes it's not the studio, it's the director, and there's different powers to be in every project. It's a different dynamic, which makes it very interesting. And then, assuming we win the project, we start the production side on the visual effects side of it. Creating the characters, animating the characters, putting fur on the characters, doing, if there's fire or there's water or whatever. And that's on the visual effects side. Technicolor also does the various parts of post-production. Post-production includes color correcting the film, sound mixing, editing parts of the film as well, and we actually go to the extent of distributing the content as well. So we, with digital cinema, we actually beam the content, or sometimes it's a hard drive that we send to the theaters if they're set up to receive and show content via digital cinema. So we kind of take it from that, from the idea place and storyboard place, and help them and partner with them through the production and then the post-production and then the distribution.
So just to get a sense of the scale, Galyn, how many people roughly at Pixar right now who are engaged in this process?
Well, Pixar as an entire entity is about 1,200 people. Half of those people are in the production side of things, and then the other half are in tools. We have an extensive software development team, as well as systems, facilities, marketing, ancillary projects, theme parks, that kind of stuff. So about half and half.
And then how about like at a studio like MPC versus, a Technicolor as a post house? Like how, what do you think would be like sort of the head?
Yeah, so on the film side for MPC, it's a very man-intensive, hour-intensive and driven business. So we have a big facility in Bangalore that has 2,000 people. We have 300 people in London, 400 people in Vancouver, 500 people in Montreal, and God knows how many people in Toronto. So, and it's all in tax-friendly locations, which is driving the work. But it's a very heavy, almost like a virtual manufacturing process, quite honestly. It's not, we're not building a physical good, we're building a digital good, and there's this efficiency that happens. It's kind of a well-oiled machine that every project has to get to that level of efficiency.
Right. So, I think just switching gears here a little bit, I thought it would be interesting also to maybe talk about innovation in this space. So this is very, filmmaking is a very well-established process and a medium, obviously. But there's also a lot of innovation that takes place in this process. And for example, one of the things that a lot of studios are looking at right now is things like pre-visualization on the early part of the production process, to really how to get a better sense of prediction on the film that you are going to ultimately make. Because the process is time-consuming and expensive. So if you can get a better sense of the film you're going to get at the end of that process. So storyboarding has certainly been the traditional way of doing it, but pre-visualization is another approach that a lot of people are looking at. Also, like creating real-time characters, for game engines and things of that nature. So I'd just, again, love to hear your perspective on sort of where you see some of the innovation happening and at least what you find interesting in that space. And especially, maybe we'll start with you, because I know you're looking at probably different kind of companies coming to you with technology solutions. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So like on a film-specific project, the innovation tends to be project-driven. So on Life of Pi, I'm sure with Rhythm and Hues as it was for MPC, fur was incredibly important. And so you're kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what how photorealistic can you make it. You're building these tools, quite honestly, to get to the level that's expected of you by the studio. So from an innovation perspective, I see it much more on a kind of a production, case-by-case basis, depending on what the requirements are, whether it's water or fur or fire or whatever the different challenges are. And the studios, our production or post-production facility, a lot of times wants to take those thought leader type of projects because the creatives really enjoy it, right? They want to be pushing. They don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again, and so they want to be challenged. And so I think the innovation tends to happen on that level. As it relates to myself and what we're looking at, it's sort of interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive, I guess. But we've been with the studios for 100 years, and so we work with studios very, very well. As part of our venture fund, we're actually looking outside of the studio system. Technicolor, at the end of the day, for the last 100 years, has been that trusted partner for content creators. How does that apply in the 21st century? What can we do with online content? What can we do with YouTubers and people on Snapchat? And just very different platforms and canvases. How does virtual reality impact the storytelling process. And what kind of stories can be told, and how can we help these storytellers tell their stories and help them make money and help consumers have great consumption experiences. That's sort of the DNA that we come from and that we apply. But by default, we're looking in really different places because you know, there's a 100-year-old machine that's been working and doing these things very well, which is fantastic, and we'll continue to do that. And there may be incremental innovation here and there, but we're really looking at new, what I consider kind of canvases, per se, for storytellers and how we can help them tell those stories.
So, Galyn, do you want to add to that at all? Or?
Sure. I guess the other thing is that aside from doing visual innovation, there's this really, sometimes what people forget is, or don't realize, is that when you look at an animated film, nothing that you're seeing exists or has existed ever, right? It's 100% virtual, which means that everything that you see on the screen had to be created by somebody. And as these environments and these worlds and this whatever you want to call it, magic that you're supposed to be creating, gets more and more detailed and complex, just the volume of information that you have to grapple with, that you have to manipulate, that you have to create, it just becomes astronomical. Mm-hmm. So though a lot of the innovation is to achieve new visual looks, a lot of the innovation is just about how do you manage the complexity of what it is that you're dealing with. You know, coming up with a new lighting system, yes, because we want to push the boundary of how things look, but also because we were getting to a place where every scene visually that we were creating would have 1,000 different light sources that were being placed by people, putting those lights and directing them and their intensity and their color and to create the visual effect. It was mind-boggling how complex it was getting. And so a lot of our focus is about how to simplify.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, again, an interesting data point here is, so Disney has a film coming out, I think very soon, called Big Hero 6. And, you know, for rendering the film, they were using basically 55,000 cores, which is just kind of crazy. And this is running for over like a 9-month period. So just a ridiculous amount of rendering that's happening. But of course, then to run 55,000 cores, I mean, you're talking about a network and you're talking about ways to mirror, you know, file servers. I mean, the scale is pretty incredible. But I think it's also a great segue to turn to Oren, because I mean, you are approaching this whole disruption in a very different way, because you're almost saying that, hey, let each user kind of be able to be the one that's in the middle of this whole experience, right?
Right. So first, kind of reflecting on the numbers, kind of funny. You know, when you said like 12,000 people, I thought, wow, that's huge. And then when you said 55,000 cores, I thought that's not that much, because Magisto is like 40 people. But you know, again, we're creating hundreds of millions of views with computers doing that. So it's kind of it's a completely automated process, and with you know, many hundreds of servers. Running and crunching the numbers and producing the videos, but so that's part of the innovation. The fact that this is kind of a full automation of the process, which is extremely human labor when you get to the level of production that you get in the big studios. So that's one thing. I think the other kind of interesting innovation that we see here is not only on the side where of movies or of TV films, we actually think about the innovation that has to happen in another form of production, which is commercials, which also kind of tries to move from the traditional world of TV, where you can broadcast and get eyeballs, to the world of social, where you can try very hard, but you're still not going to get a lot of eyeballs, because it's a different distribution mechanism. People has to distribute you in order to get a very high number of views. So you might have very good content, and you know, I challenge you to go to each of the big studios or big brands' YouTube pages and look at the videos there and how many views they got. You know, it's in millions, and this is like extremely good content. This is the best content that you have there, which is kind of surprising. So even big brands with extremely good content find it difficult to get distribution in the social world. And in that sense, we're trying to flip this paradigm on its head by actually taking branded content and brands and taking the brands and injecting them to people's memories. So, for instance, we've done a campaign with Pampers with a new baby theme that we released, which is kind of a new editing style that is focused on the main character, which is supposed to be a baby and what he's doing, et cetera, et cetera. And Pampers was sponsoring this whole campaign. Now, we generated more views than Pampers got in their entire YouTube channel in the last 6 months or more. Okay, and we've done it like in a week. Same with Discovery Channel. You might think, this is a great production company. We generated more than 1 million views in a matter of a few weeks for them. Again, very difficult for them to get that on YouTube and on social, because the difference here is the paradigm is completely the opposite. Instead of broadcasting and putting a video on YouTube and hoping that people will share it and make it viral, we tell people, hey, do something about yourselves, about your lives, about your memories, and connect it with a relevant brand. Connect Discovery with your travels. Connect Pampers with your baby movies. Connect whatever. Okay, connect. We've done something with Zappos around happiness, and then people distribute it and create those lots of millions of views because it's about themselves, but it's connected to the brand. So this is a kind of completely different way of looking at what is advertising and how to take the extremely high value that brands have and also extremely good content and try to put it on social.
So two quick comments on that. One, just to go back to the film industry, I think there needs to be and there is innovation on the labor side of it, because labor is such a big part of the cost. So anything that kind of can break the labor model is something that's very interesting. Especially any tools or technologies that allow for collaboration globally I think is very important. So it's no longer one facility in one city. Look at us. I mean, literally in 6, 7 cities, and the team is not in one location. They're in multiple locations, and they need to be very, very tightly kind of integrated and cohesive. So, so that's on the film side. On content and online content, interesting point that you bring up, because I think the issue of engagement is what I've been seeing on the venture side is a big issue, and it's not just brands. I think it's much broader, content creators, and how do they engage with their audience, and that could be independent filmmakers, that can be YouTubers, that can be film studios, that could be brands. It's sort of they're shouting and they're shouting from the top of the hill, but they want to hear a voice back, and there's a lot of innovation and a lot of startups that are about engaging directly with their fans. How can you monetize directly with your fans? How do you target the super fans? A lot of monetization, a lot of innovation around monetization, which is driven by engagement. So I think what you're saying is definitely resonates to what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, the whole collaboration. Living in a world with makers, people all want to make, they want to contribute, not just be sort of receiving, and also the social aspect of it. I mean, it's interesting that Twitter's big pivot towards entertainment. It's like we don't even talk about it, but really what made Twitter successful was to some extent the adoption by the entertainment industry really pushed forward their numbers pretty significantly. So it's a really interesting aspect. But I think there's something else that's maybe worth talking about, because with the with the films or DVDs, which are kind of in decline, but even like being replaced by streaming services, there's a pretty well-known model for monetization. We make the content, people essentially pay for the content, or in some cases, like with television, they pay through advertising. So some very well-known sort of monetization models. And then, of course, I think that is also transforming. So I'd love to hear everyone's sort of perspective on that aspect of it too.
So actually, yeah, you just touched the two models we work with. So direct, we monetize direct B2C model, which is subscription, and that has turned Magisto to kind of the top grossing photography application of its kind worldwide. But on some places, it's going to be more difficult. So, for instance, if you get to places like Magisto is 45 million users worldwide. It's not in the U.S. It's really spread worldwide. So, very, very significant difference between users in the U.S. versus users in Russia versus users in China. So, if we charge $5 per month or 18 per year, that's maybe reasonable in the U.S., not so in China. And then you need to also to find, and there's also a matter of kind of a culture of paying or not paying, obviously. So I think in that regard, we also, that's why also we started to work with the other model, which is, we called it branded content, but essentially it is ads, okay, in a way. So we also got to both of these directions, and we offer both, essentially.
Yeah, no, I just recently I read about a couple of really interesting developments in this sort of space as well. One is a company called Hive.io, and it's basically a cloud storage service for people's personal content. And what they have is they have a sort of a free version with ads, and they have a premium version which is without ads. But the interesting thing is that if you bring in as you bring in more people into your network and who sign up for Hive, essentially even the premium account can become free. So they're basically saying that, hey, if you engage with us and you basically go market on our behalf, we're going to reward you in different ways. So it's sort of kind of interesting monetization.
And there's even that concept is being bountied about also with premium content. Mm-hmm. So it's called AVOD, I believe. And so it's like, hey, you want to watch Thor Part 3 or whatever the next movie is, and you have to watch 3 ads before you get to watch the film, but you get it for free, or free. So yeah, I see that.
And then there's another one, like the Reddit, they just raised another round, and they're doing this really interesting thing, is they're going to take a part of their round and turn it essentially into cryptocurrency that they will basically distribute amongst their contributors. Because Reddit is essentially, it's a contributor-based platform, right? So I guess they just want to figure out a way to actually engage that community back, because the community is giving for nothing. So if they can be a part of the success as well. So I mean, there's just some really interesting kind of monetization models that are coming up, which are very hybrid and variable. But then there's another aspect, especially for large studios, right? Obviously, and with the tentpole projects, is that there are significant investments, capital investments, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially on a film. I think. The Hobbit films, I think they're setting a record now. The series is up to, $750 million at this point. So in terms of cost. So I guess I'm kind of curious again, from a big studio perspective, about risk tolerance and how that is tied to monetization as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because with the large temples, as you're indicating, they are hugely expensive, but what you're doing is you're creating an event. You're creating an event that you're expecting people are going to pay a reasonable ticket price for and bring their families. And the monetization of that, as long as you have a successful movie and you market it well and you don't shy away from spending the marketing dollar, you will usually get the return on the investment if you've created a quality product. The problem is that that's not the case for that next tier down. If you're not a tentpole, and you're not an event film, and you're creating a film that does cost enough money that you do actually need a successful theatric release, maybe you've invested $15 million in creating a really special, whatever it is, buddy picture, love story, rom-com, whatever you call it, and you spend, probably even more in an attempt to market that film to get people into the theaters, the odds are very slim that you're going to actually break even. And that's because the marketplace is an international marketplace. And for those smaller films, usually what people are finding is that they don't play beyond the country that they're created in. They just really don't have that worldwide appeal that some of these tentpole pictures do. And so the fear is that we're going to lose that entire beautiful middle section of film production because we aren't finding an economically viable alternative to a theatric release where you can actually monetize enough that you can pay the ultimately, maybe it's $30 million cost of creating and marketing your film.
And you're actually seeing that already, in that the studios are doing less films but bigger budget films, and heavy reliance on sequels where the risk is a lot less because, you know, with The Hobbit 3 or whatever number they're at, you know, they have a pretty good view of what's going to happen with that film based on historical precedents and the director itself. And so there's definitely what appears to be a risk-averse action by the studios.
But do you think it's a problem with the marketing budget, or with something more deeper than that they just cannot penetrate to create a return on investment?
Well, I think part of it is just that people have so many different choices now in terms of how they consume their media, that really they're being much more selective about what they want to bother going to a theater for, right? Why should I go to a theater when I can, you know, turn on Netflix, stream it to my television, sit very comfortably, don't have to sit next to a stranger, don't have to get into a car, right? It just, I'm only going to go through that event process if I've got an event film to go and see.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very polarized marketplace in that sense. I mean, there are some films that, I mean, you know, if you look at the distribution, there's like the films that were in the middle of the sort of box office range have just kind of dropped off. I mean, so you have the tentpoles who are doing, you know, great box office, the Marvel films, for example, and then you have the independents, you know, that still have their following. But the middle market, you know, what was considered to be the 40 to a sort of $80 million box office film, that's really kind of almost disappearing right now. So I think the other aspect of monetization is obviously we increasingly live in a culture, in a society, especially when you look at the global marketplace where people don't want to pay for content, right? And so I'm just curious kind of how you are approaching that. I mean, in addition to sort of collaborating with brands, what's your thinking? I mean, if let's say that your service cost X to run, and like, what are other ways that, you know, if the consumer simply doesn't want to pay for the content, what do you do?
So again, there's the two models you just mentioned, but actually, you know, what we see in our case that at least at our competitive place right now in the market, people are paying, and actually they're not just that they're paying quite a lot, and they're paying pretty fast. So from our perspective, when we see people that are engaged, that really like the video we make for them, they pay like within 24 hours. Okay, when they download the app, they just pay. So it also really depends on, again, on the audience. If you look at subscription, it's not as suitable for teenagers versus, you know, adults or parents that will just say, hey, you know, I can do that in maybe 2 days. They can't, but that's what they think. $5 is nothing for me. Okay, my time is worth much more. So we actually see them pay. So if you move people, they'll pay. So that's I think definitely on the movie side. You know, when you move people, they not only they'll pay, but their kids will also want the merchandise. You know, for years afterwards. So there's another way to kind of make money of it. But then again, you know, if on places that doesn't have the culture for paying, or again, it's just not reasonable enough to pay for them that amount, then you have to find a symmetric market. And in our case, symmetric market seems like to be the brands that are trying to get engagement for users. We have engagement, you know, they have the brand value they want to bring, and so we just try to meet them together. But essentially, someone needs to pay for this, right? For this to be a business, either brands or users.
I think the interesting thing is seeing some of the economic model outside of advertising. So, you know, YouTube, a lot of YouTubers get millions of fans, and, you know, they're giving X percent, a big percent to YouTube for any kind of the ad dollars that get generated. What you're seeing is a big movement to go offline or to go to other online locations where they're selling, you know, some of the YouTubers are in beauty and fashion, and they're selling beauty and fashion products, and they're having basically these mini conventions where, you know, teenage girls are going there, and they're, you know, incredibly excited to get their autograph and to buy some of their merchandising. And so there is an economic model there, but it's sort of this online versus offline. You know, some people are doing fan, they're part of the fan club, and so every month they get a little, you know, goodie from their star that they admire. And there was a recent study that said the top 10 most famous individuals for teenagers, 6 of them were YouTubers, basically. And so there is an economic model there. It's just not the obvious one. It's sort of evolving, which is really fascinating to watch. And some of these businesses are doing really, really well. But it's just taking some time to kind of uncover what those models are.
And I mean, I think it also does inform the funding cycle, because I think the investors in some of these kind of ventures have to really think about, you know, what their sort of timeline is and whether that makes sense or not. Right? You know, so I think we are almost getting up to 6 o'clock. So I'd love to like maybe close out with a little fun question of like where do you see us all being in like about 5 years from now? Like, in terms of this whole content landscape and with everything moving so quickly. Maybe I'll start with Oren, actually.
I will, you know, expect, hope to see much greater continuity between what we define today as user-generated content to premium content. There's going to be a lot of range in the middle because of joining that. So we're actually trying to push that direction, for instance, on some campaigns or deals that we work with on taking premium content and then bringing that and meshing that with user-generated content. Which, so for instance, think about going to a Dodgers game and you sit in a stadium, and when you take that video, you have, you know, your own iPhone or smartphone or whatever, and that's just your angle. It's very personal, okay, but not compared to the kind of production quality that you can get from TV. But, you know, when we take that content, working with the producers of the premium content, we mesh it up, you get something which is personal and then something which is high quality. So it's better than your iPhone could have seen, but it's also very personal. So you created a life experience that was, you know, very emotional, very powerful, and is you know, can get to very high professional qualities. Now, that's just one thing, okay? But, you know, we are the nice thing about non-labor intensive things like Magisto is that going from here to the one camera to every camera in the stadium, which is every iPhone being held there, okay? Editing from all that in real time is something that no one can do right now. I think that's going to happen for sure in the next 5 years. So you'll be seeing some things that are meshing up professional content with user-generated content that will take what we call user-generated content to places we cannot even imagine because of the scale that you can do that and the speed that you can get there. So that's kind of I expect to see more of this spectrum happening, and you know, I think it's going to happen pretty fast, because in terms of technology limitations, there are none. Nothing. It's just you know, getting people to think about that and understand this is a viable option almost now.
Yeah, for me, if I was trying to predict the future, which I'm not going to be able to do, would be I think virtual reality is going to be just prevalent everywhere, and I think in the film industry, you'll see it on the set. You'll see it in pre-visualization, where they could actually, the actors are going to be able to effectively see, or the directors will be able to see how the visual effects would actually interact in the scene itself without having to imagine it. So I think it'll be very prevalent in the production process. I think it'll be very prevalent in the consumption experience as well. So on the home, in the home, you know, consuming content, maybe non-linear content that's actually based on sensors, based on you know, smart watches that are checking your heart rate so you're really stressed out. So a horror film will, you know, be less horrific or maybe more horrific based on how you want your films to be.
Based on your age.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's going to be, I think it's going to be a whole new storytelling process, and we're starting to see some of that. I still think we're a little bit farther away for it to be mainstream, but I think that is something I feel comfortable will happen.
And I mean, did you see the Magic Leap, you know,
Yeah.
Series A, which is like it's Series B, right? I think, or
What, half a
but it's like
billion
a half
dollars?
a half a billion dollar Series B round with like Google leading. I mean, it's basically retinal displays, so it's kind of again immersive technology similar to Oculus.
So I think there's going to be a focus on trying to integrate these disparate areas of media consumption and leverage it into getting more people into the theaters. So here's kind of how I see this happening. And maybe this is a pipe dream, but here it is. People go to a movie because of two reasons. They want to connect with the characters, and they want to be told a story. And I think that the way we're going to get more people into the theaters for some of these non-event-driven films is to get people to connect with the characters through social media and online and get them to buy in and then go to see the story in the theaters. So this is how I see this happening. People like to consume about 2 to 5 minutes worth of video at a time. That's really all people have time for these days. And so what you do is you introduce your world and your characters in that format. You show characters that are compelling, that people can relate to. Maybe you serialize them. You have 5, 10, 15 little 2-minute clips about each of your main characters within this world that you're trying to create. And you make that at the same time that you're making your feature film. And you build a following over a course of maybe 6 months or a year leading up to the theatrical release of your film. So that people have now bought into 10 different characters and they're interested. They like what they're seeing. There's somebody there that they can relate to. And then you have your event, which is the film that tells this great story about those characters all together. I think that's what we're going to need to do if we're going to sort of take advantage of the social media and be able to market without marketing, telling these little stories, getting people to connect with characters before they even walk into the theater. It's almost like your theatric presentation at that point is like a sequel. You've almost got that kind of built-in following by having taken advantage of the vast social media network in advance. So that's kind of how I see it going.
That would be interesting from a user feedback perspective as well, which is actually something that doesn't happen as much as it could.
Well, it can certainly vastly affect how you would edit that final feature film, because you would have you know a lot about how all your different characters are trending and what people are connecting to and what they're excited to see.
Decide which characters to kill.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me, like I think the vision would be similar. I think that again for these big event-based properties, it is very expensive, and they kind of have to build up. And I think they'll have to, unless you buy a Star Wars franchise, right? You're going to have to basically build up towards that pinnacle. And so I agree that I think a lot of that initial part is going to have to be socially driven, where you're really kind of opening up as a filmmaker or as a creator to your audience, and you're making sure you're finding that right audience. Then hopefully you're sort of peaking with sort of an event where it becomes something that becomes a part of the cultural landscape or of what people are thinking about, or as a shared experience. And then having a much longer tail with immersive ways of then actually cohabiting that story, either with sort of the kind of things that Oren's talking about, or with Oculus, where you can literally become a part of that story and then continue that experience with with games and all of these things. So I think we're going to see like these sort of it's such a crowded place that to get into the social conversation is very, very hard. It takes a lot. I feel like it's the things that actually make it there and reach that sort of event status are going to have much longer tails to them and much more immersive and interactive tails. So I think I want to thank the panelists so much for coming out, and actually Al flew. Yeah, so you flew up from LA. So, and then we had another panelist with us, unfortunately, from Warner, Alex, who couldn't make it because he sort of threw his bag. But I just want to thank him, even though he couldn't be here. So, and I guess we could open it up for a few minutes for question, Talia, or are we out of time? Yeah, we could open it up for a few questions if people are interested. Yeah.
One thing I think is the same between film, startups, you have very valuable intellectual property, and you have a wide variety of different partners and such you need to work with to bring that to the market. And you need to be able to do that, collaborate with them, and protect your property. I was wondering if there's any lessons you learned or innovations you can talk about in that area.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, maybe Al, do you want to take that one as a part of that chain, value chain, or?
You want to repeat the question?
Oh, so I mean, the question, sorry, yeah. So the question is basically that, like a startup or in the film production space, I mean, we are working obviously with very valuable IP. And yet you're forced, it's not something you can do by yourself in a garage. So you are forced to collaborate with a pretty extensive set of partners. And so the question is, how can you sort of do that and be successful and yet sort of protect your IP? Am I kind of correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have a great answer for that, but I would say two things. One is, I actually think a filmmaking process and a startup are very different. There are some similarities, but are different in a couple things. One is the film typically is literally picture perfect, like pixel perfect, and it's released to the audience after 3 years, typically maybe more, and it's just like been iterated and reviewed and until it's absolutely perfect, which I actually think is the antithesis of what a startup should do. At a startup, you try to release it as quickly as you can, get some level of validation, and so you don't want to wait 3 years to do it. The second thing, the reason I think it's different is I actually think small teams can create wonderful innovation. A lot of times in a film, you have X thousands of shots you got to work on. There's just nothing you can do about it. I mean, you need hundreds of people to work on it, literally. There's been amazing innovation with 3 or 4 people. And so I actually think it may be more different than similar. So again, I don't know if I'm answering your question other than just giving a perspective to your question, but that's my perspective.
No, I mean, some films you wish would fail quickly and early.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly.
And I mean, to add a little bit more to it, so I think there's also one other difference, right? At least with the studio setup, is that the relationship is very asymmetric. The studios are obviously the 800-pound gorilla, and the vendors they work with essentially do what they are told, what they have to do. And so some of the studios, like Marvel is probably the most draconian in this regard, is they really have very specific guidelines about security, and they will run an audit. Essentially, if you're working with them, they'll do an audit of your studio pretty much every year. And it's to the point that we cannot even give internet access on the same network that has production data. So they can get pretty specific and stringent. Other questions, perhaps? Okay. Well, thank you so very much for coming. Thank you.